wish to be if you don't wish to be on camera, you can, mute your video and, change your name if that feels most comfortable for you. Um, so I'm Carrie Klun. I'm with the events planning team for the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition. So welcome to the first of our series of 4 events. We're super excited to have so many folks here. And so I'm going to pass it over to our board chair, Kim Walvert, to start us off with a land acknowledgement.
Hello, everyone. I am Kim Welvert. I am an RN IBCLC with CentraCare St. Cloud Hospital Neonatal Intensive Care, as well as chair for the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition. It is my privilege and honor to state our land acknowledgement. The Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition acknowledges that each person here is inhabiting land that has been the traditional home of Native Americans. This unceded land is home to over 10,000 lakes and the mighty river Ojibwe people call the Father of Waters, and Dakota people call River of the Falls. This land has been home to many Native communities and is now home to 7 Ojibwe reservations and 4 Dakota tribal communities. These families have long known that breast milk is a baby's first medicine, and yet colonialism and historical violence has broken the tradition of breastfeeding for many Native families and communities. Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition is dedicated to partnering with Indigenous families and communities to reclaim and restore breastfeeding as the first food of choice for all babies.
Thank you, Kim. So I'm just going to start us off with kind of where we are here today. So it's the first week of August, so we're celebrating World Breastfeeding Week and National Breastfeeding Chest Feeding Awareness Month. The theme for this month is Together We Do Great Things, and the theme for this week is Step for Breastfeeding, Educate and Support. We know how important that is to have support for helping families achieve their goals. And so we're excited to hear from many amazing panelists over the next 4 sessions in August to learn a little bit more about how we can step up for breastfeeding and support the families that we're working with. So we're a part of the Reclaiming and Celebrating Cultural Human Milk Feeding Traditions in Modern Times webinar series. And the first of our series is Anna Brock, an IBCLC with private practice and also with the Ramsey County peer program. And then next week, in honor of Indigenous Milk Medicine Week, we have Pearl Walker Swaney joining us. Then the following week for Native American Pacific Islander Week, we have Tiffany Yang, Zoa Lee, and Pakia Yang. And then finishing off the last week for Black Breastfeeding Week, we have Sierra Williams. So we hope that you can return and join us for all of the webinars this month. And I will pass the baton over to our presenter for today, Anna Brock. Thanks so much for joining. Here is Anna's lovely picture and her website if you want to connect with Anna after the event. And I'll stop sharing so that you can take the reins, Anna.
Thank you. Thanks, Carrie. I have shaved my head since I sent that picture, but it's starting to grow back out a little bit. But you can still tell it's me, right? So this is not my first time speaking for the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition, and probably a lot of you know who I am. I know who some of you are, and some people are new to me. So I think that's great. But yes, my name's Anna. I'm an IBCLC. I live in South Minneapolis, and I work for St. Paul Ramsey County, WIC, and a couple of the other kind of like public health umbrella like departments that I dabble in as well, doing lactation support, and then a little bit in private practice. I don't do a ton of that, mostly with queer and trans families. I got my start in the lactation world as a LHA League leader for LHA League of Minnesota and the Dakotas, and did a lot of inclusion and equity work there, more when my children were babies. And then once I got my BCLC, I started working for Ramsey County. And my kids are now 7 and 9 years old. and they're the best. And so I'm a single parent, and I have done tons and tons of like sort of, especially related to queer and trans equity work in, you know, education for lactation professionals and advocates, nationally, internationally, and lots of local stuff, which is why probably you already know who I am. And I feel very blessed to, you know, to live and work in a community where people want to listen to what I have to say. That's very cool. And you know, if you're from WIC, you also probably know me too from the, you know, sort of like statewide WIC stuff. But yeah, so I'm talking about sort of where we are at for lactation support for queer and trans. You'll never hear me and most actual queer people use the term LGBT. It just makes me feel like it's 1994. You'll never hear me say LGBT. It's really a nice term for straight people to use, but it's not. You'll hear me say queer and trans, but I mean LGBT. You know, umbrella, queer and trans umbrella. So speaking for the queer and trans community, I'm definitely not qualified to speak for the whole queer and trans communities, but I do a lot of work locally, and so I feel, you know, as speaking for myself as a lactation advocate and professional and a queer trans person, I identify as queer and genderqueer or gender nonconforming. And I have a partner also who is gender nonconforming, gender non-binary. I feel qualified to speak on this topic, but like I said, don't speak for all queer folks, even a little bit. But wanting to just kind of address where we're at, especially locally, but like I'll talk about just like the big grand scheme of things too, and lactation support for queer and trans folks. Oh, I'm going to share my screen first because I actually want to show you just St. Paul Ramsey County WIC Peer Breastfeeding Counselor Program having a event for World Breastfeeding Week. Can you see the flyer, y'all?
We can see it. Yep.
Yay. So next Tuesday, August 9th, we're having an event at the Highland Park Library in coordination with Diva Moms. So if you want the flyer, you can contact me for it. Otherwise, I don't know, screenshot it or something. And yeah, spread the word, please. Thanks. And there we go. Okay, you can see me again now, right?
Yep, we see you.
All right, it's like magic. Okay, so when talking about like lactation support and where we are at supporting queer and trans families, I mean, have we come very far? Yes. Do we have very far to go? Yes. And of course, you know, like always with sort of progress, social, political progress, there's always like also tons of pushback, backlash, and so we're right in the middle of that all the time, as it like cool as it is to see like the queer and trans community kind of gaining a voice back. There's like a lot, you know, I'll break it down, like just kind of my thoughts on it, but there's a lot of like well-intentioned but missteps, like a lot of tokenizing and like kind of half-assed attempts at inclusion and equity. Great example of that is it's like, is it cool and is it a step forward that people are trying to use inclusive language where they say, for example, like parents instead of mothers? Yeah, it's awesome. But what I see is like a lot of people wanting to say like, oh yes, we want to do that, but don't want to actually do the work to do it. So they put like an asterisk. Whether that's verbal or like literal, sometimes in like printed materials, like a training that I have been doing for WIC through the USDA, which is a breastfeeding training like for all of these WIC staff, that at the very, it's like this really long, extensive training at the beginning of the first day of training. The presenter introduces herself and then does a land acknowledgement and then like a statement about diversity and like equity for, or like inclusion for queer and trans families. And I'm thinking like, oh, I really didn't expect this. I didn't expect them to like be naming this. But that was it. That was it for this like hours and hours and hours of training. They didn't say the word parent again. They didn't like acknowledge the existence of trans people again. They didn't, it was like almost they had their like little diversity nugget where they were like, and we're going to do a land acknowledgement and we're going to say like, hey, we acknowledge that trans people exist, and then we're going to shut that box, put it over here, and now we're doing this breastfeeding for mothers, like, and we're not going to talk about colonialism again. We're not going to talk about white supremacy again. We're not going to acknowledge the existence of queer and trans families again. And so, I mean, that is like, not to just do a call out. That's not what I'm trying to do. But it's just an example. It's exactly where we're at, I think. Is like well-intentioned people being like, oh, hey, we're doing this thing. Should we be inclusive? Should we do an inclusion thing? Should we do a land acknowledgement? Like, is that a good? And then that's kind of it, you know. Or they have like, you know, make a social media post or flyer or something for Pride Month. And then after Pride Month, it's like, we don't acknowledge that queer and trans families exist anymore. So it's just kind of that little, it's like the little but not quite enough efforts to kind of make, you know, lactation support more accessible. And I, especially is like a big pet peeve of mine to see the literal asterisks when they say like, so we, and not just this training, like all over the place, this happens all over the place. Like, so we acknowledge that people who don't identify as mothers feed their babies, breastfeed, chest feed, whatever. However, to make it easier for us, we're just going to use the word mother. And so when you hear us say mother, remember that we don't just mean mother, we mean parent, other parents too, of all genders. They're all included in the word mother. Well, no, they're not all included in the word mother. Like, you don't get just to say, as like a cis het white like person who's giving like a training or something like that, or leading an organization or something like that, like, well, we mean parents, we mean queer and trans parents when we say mother. So because it's not, you know, the whole queer and trans community, like the global and local on any level, are not like an asterisk at the bottom of the page, not a disclaimer, and it's not really an like social justice or like equity like ideology to kind of like acknowledge the existence of, but not intentionally name. Like, real inclusion, real equity means intentionally naming the folks who are marginalized, who are pushed to the sides, who are not named, like bringing them to the forefront. Like, we're not just gonna have a little statement that says when we say mothers, we mean parents. We're going to say parents. Sometimes we're even going to say trans parents, like intentionally naming, because it's in taking that time and carving out that space where you're really changing things for those families, where you're really making change. Otherwise it's just lip service, you know what I mean? And so, I mean, not that I don't think it's great to that, like, we've made these little steps that people are trying to acknowledge, or people is coming onto their radar, like, hey, oh yeah, this should be on our radar, but like, better, more, we can do better, we can do more. Yes, so where queer and trans folks are at with you know, it's like a lot of like where my lens comes from is now, after having been an IBCLC for 4 years now, is like my lens is really through that of a professional. I'm not breastfeeding my kids anymore. Although my 7-year-old still asks, sometimes I weaned her 5 years ago, but I see it less through the lens of a parent, but I'm still working like every day with these parents. And so through my lens as a provider, a lot of like the things that I'm picking apart are like what I see from organizations and departments, and like what the lactation providers are putting out there. But to speak from kind of the community of parents and where queer and trans folks actually get their support, get their their lactation, like their help with lactation, is going to be like, yes, they're going to go to IBCLCs, in the hospitals, in the clinics, in at WIC. But like a lot of people are moving to social media and more peer-to-peer and like crowdsourcing information is especially true for the queer and trans community, because we have our own community. We have really close-knit communities locally and globally, queer and trans people. We know each other, we trust each other, and we have special, we have special issues, I guess, or like needs that aren't necessarily going to be understood by the broader like cishet folks who are lactating and feeding their babies. So we have our own groups, social media groups, and like the broader the broader field of lactation, or just like in general in parenting, the villages that the literal like physical and geographical closeness that we used to have in groups has now been like replicated online, and that's very much true for queer and trans folks. And so they crowdsource and get a lot of information from their peers about for example, like, inducing lactation, or when did you stop hormones, or how long did it take you to get your menstrual cycle back, or how much milk were you making at 3 weeks postpartum, whatever questions they have. And then queer and trans folks are really, really great about like hearing each other, meeting each other where they're at, saying like we have super good boundaries. Like I can't say enough good stuff about you'll just like notice this probably about me. Like I can't say enough good stuff about how great queer and trans folks are at like their own stuff, and like how bad providers are at like serving them. And I'm saying that as a provider, but it's just, and I know it's like I'm jaded and I'm always like overcritical, but that's my job. That's what you're asking me to do, really. Or I don't know, maybe you're asking me to be super positive, but then you're going to be disappointed. So I'm just joking around. But, actually, because of the like formula shortage and just people talking more and just having so much like social interaction with more social media pages and all of the information at their fingertips, you all, I'm sure, if you work in any area of lactation, are aware that inducing lactation in general is becoming something that a lot more people are aware of. I don't think 3 or 4 years ago, there were a lot of cishet people reaching out to me asking about inducing lactation or relactating. It happens sometimes, but like by far, the majority of people who were interested in relactation or inducing lactation were trans women or other adoptive, like queer and trans parents, or just queer folks who were like a non-birthing, either adoptive or their partner was birthing. And now it's like every day, either someone from WIC or just someone from anywhere who just like Googled and found me. They're in like Texas or Maine or something, and they're like, can you help me induce lactation? I'm like, I'll try, from across the country. But and it's cishet folks all the time, which is awesome. We love to see it, right? And what's awesome about it for queer and trans folks is that means that with more folks asking and more providers talking and learning about it, providers, maybe even unknowingly, are becoming more well-versed in how to support queer and trans folks, the people who are going to be doing a lot of that inducing lactation and relactating. Like a lot more providers are familiar with it now, and peer counselors saying like, oh yes, I know what it takes to relactate, and I know who to hook you up with, and I know what we can do to get you started, who to refer you to, things like that I think has been like a really quick progress with that in just the last few years, and like what the just the field of lactation looks like. So that's a great thing. I think. The barriers there are still there for queer and trans folks, being how do you connect those families to like a provider who's going to really competently support them? And how are they going to be able to pay for it? And, you know, like the problem that we're all familiar with, getting lactation consultants in network with insurance companies, or, you know, all of the hospitals having, or clinics, or wherever the person is actually in network, the families in network with their insurance to have an outpatient lactation provider. And I have had multiple times this year have been in the position where I'm not in network as a private practice provider. I don't work in a hospital or clinic outpatient. I work for WIC. And so if you're not on WIC and you can't pay out of pocket, like I do a very generous sliding scale. But if a family has the ability to see a provider outpatient lactation at their hospital or clinic for you know, it's covered by their insurance, they of course will prefer that. And if they're not on WIC or don't live in Ramsey County where they can see me. So I've had this experience like more and more often where queer and trans families will reach out to me, say like, hey, we need lactation support. I'll tell them what I can provide. They will select their the LC at their hospital at where they're birthing, as, you know, like they'll be like, well, we're going to try this person first and see if they can help us, because this is, our insurance completely covers it, and then we'll let you know. And then that lactation consultant ends up calling me to ask me how to serve that family. And so I'll spend a lot of time emailing and calling with lactation consultants who are working in clinics where they're accepting insurance. And then I don't get paid for it, which is kind of a bummer, but I'm well compensated in other areas of my you know, different places where I work. But it's an interesting thing I've noticed is that these providers, and so it's great, and then it's also kind of a problem because providers want to be able to competently support, and they're not there yet, but at least they know who to go to for the information. I just need to figure out how to like get in network with insurance or get paid for it. So, but a lot of that, you know, it's like families cobbling together. Like we asked our neighbors how they induce lactation, so we have that information, and we went to this hospital provider for, you know, to ask them about, you know, some nipple pain, and so we have that kind of place for support. And then we asked Anna about, you know, this and that other thing. So it's so cobbling together kind of a like a whole network of support, which is what we want to see families doing. And like I said, I can't say enough about how good queer and trans folks are at finding their own resources and doing that. The problem, of course, sometimes with kind of crowdsourcing information is that there's a lot of misinformation that really irks me. I got to tell you, I like online, I know you all know this about me already, or like feel this way yourselves, but there's so much misinformation online, in social media groups. Like I admin a Facebook group about inducing lactation that is like really big, like has a global membership, and like I don't even know how many people are in it. A lot. It's a really busy group. There's a lot of posts every day, and I can't tell you how many times every day someone posts saying, what did you do to increase your supply? And multiple folks respond saying, I drank 7 body armors a day and I took sunflower lecithin, and that's exactly what worked for me. And then I'm like pulling out my hair, like, listen, folks, no. So that misinformation in the peer-to-peer information, you know, support is a big problem. And I think it impacts queer and trans people who maybe don't have access to like the really competent provider. So they ask their neighbor, they ask their friend, they ask their cousin. But queer and trans folks, I just gotta say, I don't see in like specific queer communities and specific queer groups, I don't see as much of that misinformation. those myths and things like that like circulating as I see in the broader like for cis het whoever groups, even when there's queer and trans people in those groups. Like I think that queer and trans people are super intentional. We do our research. I don't know. We like don't just believe anything that we read online. And I don't know why. Why is it that we need to see the evidence to believe it? But I think it's really cool. And part of what I want to say is behind that is that I believe queer and trans folks have like, maybe this is, I don't know, just like my daydream that I want to, that, you know, the world I want to live in. But I believe that just being queer and being trans gives you an inherent like value and ideology of anti-capitalism, anti-white supremacy, anti-patriarchy, and that in the absence of those things, when you say like, when you look at things through an anti-capitalist lens, you're looking at science, you're looking at evidence, and there's capitalism, white supremacist patriarchal capitalism has dug its nasty little claws into lactation support, into the peer, you know, into like the buy this. Well, you'll be able to make enough milk if you buy the sunflower lecithin and get a haka and get this $400 pump, and do this and do that, and you'll only need to feed your baby 6 times a day if you get this bottle. And it's you know, so like has removed us so far from where, like as mammals, from where we started, you know what I mean? And so I think that our community, just through inherent like lens of like, we deconstruct white supremacy and capitalism because it's the system that oppresses us. And not to say that we're immune to, you know, like aggressive marketing of whatever products, or of just like just how deep capitalism has impacted lactation. Because, you know, before aggressive formula marketing, mammals fed their babies and it wasn't a thing. Like it was always a thing, but it like wasn't a thing. It's just what we did. And it's like the same thing with gender and sexuality. Like before this like system of industrial capitalism that we live in, like being trans and being like queerness, a broad spectrum of genders and sexualities, was always a thing. It always existed, but it like wasn't a thing until capitalism was like, oh, it's a thing. And so in that way, I feel like queerness and the lactation, whatever, just feeding babies, mirror each other. And I find it interesting. I find it to be an interesting little intersection. This is all like deep theory. Maybe we can talk about, I don't know, something concrete. There's local sources of support for queer and trans people. There's a Queer Birth Project. It's a great organization. It's kind of gone up and down and all over the place with what it offers and who it serves. And, you know, like anything that's kind of like run by birth workers, it's like, we're so great at like starting stuff, right? But it's actually, no, it's totally kept up traction, and they have several groups, and it really is a good thing to the Queer Birth Project. They have a new parent group and prospective parent group and childbirth education classes. And, you know, certainly there are queer doulas and a couple of queer lactation consultants. Are, you know, as far as when we say like lactation consultants, like our IBCLCs in Minnesota are so cis het white. Like I can't believe it. Just given how I feel like the field of like birth and postpartum workers, I don't know, to me it's like an inherently queer like field to work in. But there's just so much cis heteronormativity and so much whiteness in like just IBCLCs because of the inaccessibility of the credential, I guess. That's what I chalk it up to, like in a nutshell. it runs deep, but like I'm getting off track. What I'm trying to say is that there's always been queer doulas and midwives and lactation supporters and lactation advocates. I think it is inherent to the jobs. It's just interesting, I think, how like we don't kind of like it doesn't become accessible to folks to get connected with that until that like person or entity has some sort of support from like, oh, the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition says like this person who's queer is like an expert, and then like now we become all aware of them. So it goes back to the question I like brought up earlier of like how to connect families with providers. Certainly, like I said, like hospitals, WIC clinics, like organizations, we have a ton of them. We have a super thriving birth and postpartum like community here. There's so many birth centers. There's lots of options for lactation support. They don't have to be a queer trans provider to be a good resource for a queer trans family. They just have to be a competent provider, which isn't what I'm talking about today on how to be a competent provider. This is more just like my rant hour. No, but I've talked about that before. For the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition and countless other organizations. So it's nice to like take a break from telling you how to be inclusive, how to use inclusive language, and just kind of talk about like the theory behind it and what I think about it. Interestingly, I spoke on that topic, actually more like on the clinical side of things, like clinical lactation support for queer and trans families for the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition at their annual conference, like 3 or 4 years ago. It was definitely pre-pandemic, I want to say. So yeah, let's say 3 or 4 years ago. And I was asked to speak and was, I think, just about to take my IBCLC exam, actually. So maybe it was 5 years ago. And I was asked to speak on that topic, started preparing my hour, and then whoever was leading the coalition at that time, and I know like the leadership has changed, so I don't think I'm calling anybody out who's like currently sitting on the board or whatever. Whoever was organizing it let me know that my time was going to be cut down to half an hour because they were giving, the topic was going to be split up between 2 presenters, and the other presenter was a cis het white lady who wasn't a lactation advocate. She was a nurse in a like gender services clinic, and she herself like wasn't like queer or trans in any way. And I'm not sure why that happened, but it was interesting to it's an example, you know, of like stuff like that happens all the time, to have to like kind of sit as a person who's like feels like you are represented in a particular marginalized community and get to sit and listen to someone who doesn't belong to that community tell you about your community. And so anyway, so I think the MBC in itself has probably come a long way just in the last few years. You know, they've all, I think, have always been equity minded, and I've definitely sat through plenty of conversations with the coalition of where they have, you know, talked about how to be more equitable and things like that. Like every organization, right? Every organization like makes like an equity committee or a task force. They like to write up mission statements and things like that on equity. And it's nice, you know, it's like, it's great. Thank you for showing us where your politics are. No, thank you for telling us where your politics are, but now you could show us what you're going to do about it. You know what I mean? And I think like the kind of more like just grassroots action, or like, who are you hiring? Who are you paying? Yes, those things like are great, but I think like there's a lot more value in like the nuts and bolts, the day to day, you know, than like, well, we like, or especially working for the county, just like, well, we have this equity task force, so you can see that we care about equity. It's like, brava. But what does it mean? What are you doing about it? So I think I'm going to share my screen while I talk, because I'm going to show you. I forgot to tell you that you could ask questions while I'm talking if you don't want to save them for the end, but it almost is the end now. So no, you're going to have to just save them for the end. Unless something comes up while I'm showing these websites and anyone has anything to say, you can just unmute yourself and share it. Just tell me who you are. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen and show you some kind of like examples of what I'm talking about as far as, I don't know, just everything that I've been talking about. This one is probably one that you have seen. The Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine released their position statement on infant feeding and lactation related language and gender. I'm not like gonna dig into this deeply or anything like that. I'm just using it as an example. Multiple things that I've mentioned about like, it's great to make a policy statement, right? It's positive. It's a good statement. They're talking about inclusion and its importance. And, you know, it says here, the ABM recognizes that diversity in sexual orientation and gender identity occurs worldwide. And they talk about, you know, how how queer and trans people are like multiply marginalized because of their intersections geographically, identity-wise, etc., have less visibility, are at higher risk for violence, things like that. This is interesting. I've actually never seen the term father's milk, but hey, great. I always say human milk or your milk if I'm talking directly to a parent instead of breast milk or mother's milk. I've never heard anyone say father's milk, but I'm very interested in that. It's not bad. It's not a bad statement, but let's like look at the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine's website. So these, let me remind you, are the folks who just issued this statement a few months ago. Let's just look at the language they use at their public-facing homepage. Promotion, protection, and support of breastfeeding. Evidence-based solutions to the challenges facing breastfeeding. Blah, 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 benefits for mothers and children. Breastfeeding is the foundation of a lifetime of health and well-being. So that's great. They made a position statement that they are in support of inclusive language. Does anybody see any inclusive language on their public-facing website? Because I don't. So this is just me being a super hypercritical person. And just saying, like, you know, task forces are great, position statements are great, but they don't get an actual like trans parent who is putting their baby to their chest anywhere. They don't get them anywhere, okay? So La Leche League, one of my favorite organizations to criticize, which I worked as a La Leche League leader for several, I don't know, 4 years or something like that. I founded an equity, diversity, and inclusion sort of department for La Leche League of Minnesota and the Dakotas. I spoke at La Leche League conferences, like other states, lots for Minnesota and the Dakotas, did a lot of trainings for leaders. So it's an organization that is very dear to my heart. It's definitely the reason that I breastfed my kids for as long as I did. I'm talking about La Leche League because they are such a good example of a place where they love to talk about equity and diversity, but they really love to protect the power that the cishet white mothers in their organization and the ones that they want to serve have. They love to tokenize folks and to like release statements saying that they support diversity, but not nearly as important to them as protecting the privilege of the cishet white moms that make up the majority of their organization. They loved to tokenize the first sort of really publicly out transgender father who became a La Leche League leader, Trevor McDonald from Canada, after initially rejecting his application for leadership, they went back and accepted and made him a leader and tokenized the crap out of him. But then there was a huge pushback when people started pointing out, when other trans leaders who actually had been leaders for a long time came out and were like, oh, well, I'm actually trans. I have been this whole time. And so now that we have more trans leaders, and now that you're openly saying trans people can be leaders, like, let's look at your language and let's look at your philosophy statements and things like that. And the Leche League pushed back so hard on protecting that gendered language and the privilege of the cishet white moms, that they like just pushed it until they had like etched it in stone. Like, no, you will not change this. And just like look at the language on their website, their vision to realize, deepen, and share the love and wisdom found in the breastfeeding relationship. Their mission to help mothers worldwide to breastfeed through mother-to-mother support. Better understanding of breastfeeding as an element in the healthy development of the baby and mother. And then you read all of that. And I mean, it's philosophy, mothering, breastfeeding. And then you're going to go down. And after that, they're going to have an inclusivity statement. Brava. LLL is committed to serving everyone, inclusive of race, ethnicity, blah, blah, blah. So it's just a fantastic example of that. Like it's of the asterisk, right? The asterisk at the bottom of the page saying, by the way, we're on indigenous land and trans people exist. The end. Let's not talk about that again. Just want to give like a quick shout out to our local chapter, the Leche League of Minnesota and the Dakotas, who say off the bat, the Leche League leaders are experienced parents who have breastfed or chest fed their own babies. Great job, LLL of Mindas. I'm pretty sure that might have been me, but no, I think that was other people also. Mindas is great, I think. And I'll share one more quick, because I want to save time for questions. This is the WIC department I work for, Ramsey County WIC. This is the public facing page. Ramsey County Public Health, breastfeeding / chest feeding support. So you can just kind of see the difference, right? Between having like mother breastfeed, mother breastfeed, mother breastfeed, and then asterisk at the bottom of the page, like we saw on the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine or like the Leche League International, versus this, the top of the page, the headline, the big letters, breastfeeding / chest feeding. We're actually carving out space. There's such a big difference. I'm going to stop sharing. All right. I don't know. I guess that's where I'm going to end on that, and take questions. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Anna, for your great presentation of, I think you made so many great points of kind of the small strides that we've made and where we need to go. And it's just really helpful to see you kind of, call out those examples and really get us thinking about how we can keep pushing inclusivity in lactation. So if anybody has a question, you feel free to put it in the chat and we can read it to Anna. Otherwise, feel free to unmute and share your camera, and we would love to just open it up as a more like informal conversation. So whatever you feel comfortable with, share in whatever way makes you feel great.
Hi, Anna. This is Maggie from Washington County. I've heard you before. Thank you for your presentation. I always enjoy hearing you. I felt a little bad today because I felt like you seemed a little more frustrated today than last time I heard you speak, with kind of where we're at and our progress on addressing this issue. And maybe it's just, your feeling today, and I can completely understand that. But I did want to tell you just a small thing for our county that I was involved in. We always do a resolution that we have our county board make for breastfeeding month. And unfortunately, we couldn't get on the docket for today or yesterday, so it'll be next Tuesday. But we did change the language in that to say chest breastfeeding. And I'm pretty excited about that because I think, you know, it just speaks to our commitment as a public health department and as a county. And we also did the same thing with our public health department's breastfeeding policy. But what I wondered is if there would be any way you could share for this group that really amazing poster that I believe you have up in your county WIC clinics, breast chest feeding welcome here, that's really inclusive. And do you know what I'm talking about? I just was really struck by that. I don't know if that would be hard for you to pull up, but I think everyone would really enjoy seeing that. And thanks again for today, Anna. It's always great to hear you.
Thank you, Maggie. I'm betting that Carrie Clun has a copy of that from some prior, I don't know, event or something like that. If not, I can share it with Carrie. Actually, Carrie, you could just ask Megan Johnson for it.
I'll definitely get it. I think I have it, but I'm not 100% where I could put my finger on it right this minute.
Yeah.
But I will, if I can't find it, I'll reach out to you and Megan, and then I can share it with anybody who joined the call today.
Okay, thanks. And Maggie, I don't think I'm, I appreciate your feedback about me seeming frustrated. I think it's more just that they asked me to do a more informal talk today. So it's more, that gives me more space instead of feeling like I have like a structured, like I need to teach you about like this clinical skill and this way to be inclusive. Instead, it just got to be me saying whatever I wanted to say. So it's just speaking from the heart more, I think. Which isn't to say that I like feel overly negative about, you know, it's like I go about my day to day, like seeing patients in the WIC clinic or, you know, doing support for peers, answering emails from private practice clients is not like, I'm not trudging through it like this is terrible. This is more just stay targeted towards like the public things that we can see organizations and departments trying to do. And what we could do is like individuals who like a lot of the people here have a little bit of leadership in those departments, just kind of like where we're at versus where we could be. But thanks.
Anna, can I ask a question? This is Thea.
Oh,
That'd
yes,
be great. Go
of
ahead,
course.
Thea.
Yeah.
Here, I'll turn on my video so I can see you. Hey, so I have a question. You know, as I've been thinking about action personally that I can take during the different celebrations of World Breastfeeding Month and weeks, and you know, where I have any type of ability to talk with people and try to influence change. I heard you mention the topic of payment, you know, and Health Partners. I'm an employee of Health Partners, and I work both on the plan and care side, more on the community partnership side, but certainly have talked with our different plan partners about payment, right? And how do we make sure clinicians know how to bill to get paid, and, you know, all the different ins and outs of everything that we all deal with as IBCLCs and working in the different spheres that we do. So I have a question about, do you see examples like best practices out there on how best to support queer and trans families that maybe are needing access from a provider that maybe isn't in network? Have you seen any successful examples, or really are we talking about building something from the ground up?
Yeah, that's a good question. Lots of things like that have been created. LGBTQIA League has put out, I mean, even in the last, even starting like 6 or 7 years ago, they started, they have like a trans tip sheet for lactation providers. I think it's outdated now because, I mean, you know, the kind of like language that the community uses to describe ourselves and like how the like, you know, like what we expect from providers is it like, I'm very proud of us in the fact that we have like, we keep it constantly like updated, like what we expect. And so it's actually already outdated, has some like words in it with definitions that I would be like, don't use that word. But there are more updated, I think, I can't remember if it was the Minnesota Department of Health recently put something out too. I was trying to find it to share it with y'all, but I couldn't find it. But I have created a few trainings that I think are available for Carrie. I don't know, are any of the trainings that I've done for WIC or the Minnesota Department of Health, are those like publicly available?
Not that I'm aware of. And I know that like the presentation that you did for the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition was like things being videoed. So it's a good excuse for us to have an MDH training featuring you and then record it and then have it available, or have a more in-depth MBC presentation, where we have you come on for a longer structured presentation. So
Sure.
I think we're looking at good opportunities for that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question, Thea, because I don't think that there is like, I mean, there's plenty of resources out there. But I don't know of like, like definitely read through the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine one. But I don't know that there's like a, it's not like ILCA or like the US LCA has like put together some kind of like clinical skills for supporting trans families or anything like that.
Right. And I was interested in specifically too in the payment piece, because I know you were mentioning that as a key barrier, right? So, I mean, if someone, let's use like cancer care as an example. If someone has a rare type of cancer where the provider is not in network, there's a process that they go through to like get it approved. And, the first time it takes a little longer, and then, and that would be an onerous process if you have something that you would need to get support for immediately, right? Like that just wouldn't sync up. So I think what we're talking about to solve the payment issues would be something a little bit different than that. But I was just wondering if anybody has really even been, how do we solve this for families?
I see. I understand your question now. Sorry. I mean, I agree. And actually that same thing is in place for like a home visit from a lactation consultant is supposed to be covered by your insurance. But by the time that you have like communicated, like a family with a newborn has communicated back and forth with their insurance company and gotten turned down so many times, it's not even worth their time to continue trying to do it anymore. And so I think that is like a question just in general about lactation support that it's like $1 million question. I am working with several organizations now that are like kind of changing what it looks like for families to get home. I know there's quite a few of these now that are either like networking with employers as an employee benefit to provide like a home visit from a lactation consultant, like at no cost to the employee, or organizations that are partnering with insurance companies to provide virtual lactation support. So virtual lactation support is becoming really accessible and easy to pay for, or like people don't have to pay for it out of pocket. But the limitations of virtual support, but also the like, removing barriers. So it's a mixed bag.
Thank you.
We are coming up to our last minute of the presentation time. So I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank Anna for doing such an amazing job of just really sharing where we're at with, support for lactation in the queer and trans community, and where we need to go most importantly. And so I'm just going to quickly launch a poll, just a 1-question poll, just to get any feedback you have, and then feel free to share in the chat or message us if you have any thoughts on what you would like to see MBC share at different events. So I will go ahead. Oops, my polling session is inactive. I'm going to try stopping share and then see if I can share the poll because it was working when I was looking at it earlier. Oh, well, the poll isn't working. So please just let me know if you have any feedback. We would love to hear from you, and we hope that you can join us for the next 3 sessions in August. And please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. And thank you once again, Anna, for your presentation and for sharing your space with us today.
Yeah, thank you.